dealing with the Iranian issue. And no one can question the fact that he deserves immense credit.
I do. So why did he do that? Why did he go to Congress to challenge the president who has the power to do that? Why did he do so?
This is a person who has worked for 20 years.
Stop being an ambassador, Michael. You're no longer an ambassador. Stop doing that. It's not.
You think you'd have the sanctions today you'd have without the contributions of Benjamin Netanyahu? That's period. I disagree with him. I have the credibility of saying this was this. I disagree with this decision.
To stop it, you know, Benny's father did something to stop a nuclear program.
But you can't deny his sincerity.
He always talks and does nothing.
Let's leave nepotism out. let's leave parents out of this. Next, MK Lippman.
I sat in the Knesset for a year and 8 months and was honored by the speaker for the highest level of attendance. And I'm mentioning that because I sat there day in and day out, and there is a consensus issue in the Knesset, and that is everyone together in unity against the developing deal in Iran, and that if it ever reaches a point where Israel has to do whatever Israel has to do, Israel will do whatever it has to do. However, we were critical of the Prime Minister's speech in Congress at the time that it was in particular, and I want to tell you, I got messages and phone calls from leaders of Jewish American groups in Washington, people who are even Netanyahu supporters, saying, what is going on over here? How are we supposed to deal with this? See what you can do to try to stop the speech at this time in this environment. Members of Congress who we were lobbying to try to make sure we had a 2/3 majority to override a presidential veto of a new sanctions bill, who contacted us and said, we support Israel, we love Israel, we want to help Israel, but this is putting us in an impossible position. So sometimes, you know, it feels very good to see the Prime Minister stand there, and I sat there, I also felt good. It feels good. Bravado, strength, Zionism. But sometimes with all of that, it actually causes Israel security damage. And I want to move from Iran for a moment because it relates to Iran, and that's Hasbara in general. There needs to be a well thought out strategy from the top down in the Israeli government all the way to the people on Facebook to help us with Hasbara. We put a law forward in the 19th Knesset. It's ready to go. It got hung up because of a fight between the Prime Minister and the Foreign Minister over who will be in charge. We need to make sure it's part of our platform that we don't reach a point where we need to make a speech down the block from the White House against the President, but where we're working hard throughout the world on creating the image that Israel needs to have, strong, safe, secure Israel with a real strategy at work so that we're never found in that panic mode.
Thank you. Mr. Perry from Yisrael Beitenu.
As advisor to the Foreign Minister for the last 6 years, I was also in many of these meetings, not just with the US, but with many of our friends around the world. And there's no doubt that the Iranian threat is very real, and it's a grave threat, and there really is a consensus issue. But before we talk about ridding ourselves of the Iranian threat in Iran, we have an Iranian threat on our borders now, in the shape of Hamas on our southern border, in the shape of Hezbollah on our northern border. What are we doing about that? Every couple of years, we have a little war with them. We kill a few of theirs, they kill a few of ours, and we go back to square one. We spend 20% of our budget. When we talk about the cost of living, we have to take into account we spend 20% of our budget on defense. The Western European countries spend less than 2%. So if we are spending all that money, surely we can achieve more than just a tie with Hamas and Hezbollah. Let's give Hamas, Hezbollah, ISIS, and all our enemies around the world their biggest nightmare and give the next defense ministry to Avigdor Lieberman. Because if Avigdor Lieberman is defense minister, there will be a fourth round, and that will be it against Hamas. There will be a third round against Hezbollah, and that will be it. Thank you.
Okay, do you want to get to the podium?
No, I'm good.
Okay.
I'd like to ask a question of the panel, and then we'll wrap up with your permission. Because Uri Bank has just joined us, I'll give him the right of first response. I think I speak for many of us in the audience when we go to the polls on Tuesday. Some of us, maybe many of us, are not sure whether to vote for a big party like Likud or Zionist Union, or for a smaller party. Uri Bank, your response: why should we vote for your party rather than the bigger party on the right?
We're short on time, so everyone's going to have 1 minute.
This is the last
Yeah.
question, and then you'll have a chance to sum up.
And 1 minute each, please.
Shavua Tov to everybody, and thanks for the question, because I know many of you are debating between the Beit Yehudi and the Likud because of this very issue. And you need to understand that the law in Israel says that the president gives the chance to the person who has the largest bloc and not the largest party. We're the only ones who came out very strong from the beginning saying we are going to recommend Benjamin Netanyahu as the next prime minister as well. Based on the numbers, he will be the next prime minister, and the question is who is going to be his senior partner. Is it going to be Tzipi Livni, or is it going to be Naftali Bennett? And if you believe in Eretz Yisrael, Am Yisrael, Torah Yisrael values that we've represented, if you're proud of Naftali Bennett going out into the international press and stating our cases, which is what needs to be done, and saying that we will capitulate no further land to the Arabs, you know that he needs to be there right next to Netanyahu with his hand on that steering wheel, because every time that Prime Minister Netanyahu tries to break to the left and do freeze on settlements or give up murdering terrorists, you need the Beit Yehudi and Naftali Bennett right along his side.
Time.
If we don't have a strong showing, then he won't take us into his government. Unfortunately, he's preferred in the past to go with the left, to go with Livni and Barak. If you believe that Bennett needs to be there, please vote for the Beit Yehudi.
I think the next two people who should answer are the people from parties who are really in danger of possibly not passing the threshold, according to recent polls, because of this debate. So, Mr. Zaki, go ahead.
I will say the following. I agree with Uri Bank, and I think if you're right-leaning and you want to secure a right-leaning policy, vote for the Jewish Home. If you're left-leaning and you want to secure a change in Israel for the better, we believe, vote for Meretz. Because Meretz, in all of its history since its founding in '92, only sat in a labor-led government or governments with Rabin and Barak. We are going to recommend Herzog, and we'll only sit in a coalition.
And Livni, right? You're going to recommend.
We're going to recommend Herzog.
Plus Livni.
You need to recommend one member of Knesset.
Package, no, it's a package.
We're going to recommend Herzog. Speak with Nachman, ask him, what about the rotation? It's not our duty.
They go with it. That's a one package.
Okay, but look.
In 2 years.
I'll tell you the following.
Okay.
Please note.
I'll tell you the
Thank
following,
you.
Benny. I'll tell you the following. We will be much
my microphone.
better off with Tzipi Livni as Prime Minister than with Benjamin Netanyahu. That's our truth. But the only danger, my only fear is that Herzog and Livni, both of them already sat in a Netanyahu-led coalition. And if you truly want Herzog to be Prime Minister, you have to vote for Meretz, because otherwise your vote might get to a Netanyahu-led coalition.
Mr. Perry, unlike Mr. Bank and Mr. Zaki, your party hasn't been campaigning on this issue, but I imagine it's important to you too.
The threshold.
The threshold.
I'm really not worried. We'll be far closer to double figures than the polls are suggesting. But I want to talk about something else at the moment. I want to talk about something that has no practical application for, I would assume, anyone in this room, but really sits deep in our hearts. For the last 6 years, you know what really worried my boss, Foreign Minister Victor Lieberman, more than anything else that came across his desk? Last year's Pew survey results. Does everyone know what I'm talking about? Which showed 70% assimilation rates in the United States. And by the way, it's not that much better in Britain, Europe, and other places. Israel Beitenu was put as part of their platform, because this isn't a vote grabber, because none of these people vote. But we are committed that in the next government, we will give hundreds of millions of dollars, which will be matched by overseas diaspora money, to create an international Jewish and Zionist school system, because it cannot be in the United States, in France, in Argentina, and many other places around the world that children
you,
will
Mr.
opt
Perry.
out of being
I'm
Jewish
going
and
to cut you
Zionist
short
because they
because that
can't
was
afford
not
to
the
send their kids to
question.
school. This is what we promise.
Thank you. I'd like everyone else to stay on topic. If you don't want to answer the question, you're welcome to pass. Okay. Yeah, let's
I want to answer that question. I'm a small
Yeah,
party.
no, okay, but we'll, all right, we'll let the smaller
far.
parties, and then we'll do the big ones. So Ambassador Oren, go ahead.
We want to be
You
a
have
large
minute.
party. I come to you after a couple of years in a country that has a two-party system, and I want to tell you that the large parties are overrated. They're completely bogged down in political polarization there, and they can't get anything done. And the Knesset actually gets much more done than the U.S. Congress does right now. The last coalition had very large parties in it, and part of their mandate called for lowering housing prices, solving the housing crisis, lowering the cost of living, and they failed. So big parties are not a panacea for the country's problems. They are parties that are actually committed to bringing about a change. Now, I don't have any, good, props with me, but I think all of you probably have one of these things with you. It's a cell phone. And there's only one person who's made a material change in your life here by bringing down the cost of cell phones, and that's Moshe Kachlon. He broke up the cell phone monopolies. My hand used to shake it every month when my son's bill would come in, his high school bill, from using a cell phone. And the state of Israel made 5 billion shekels off the breakup of the cell phone monopolies. That's your answer. Last point. When you go into the polls on Tuesday, and if you want to vote for a large party, know that there's a 50% chance that your vote is going to be lost. It's going to be like betting on the red and black on a roulette table. If you vote for the Kulanu party, we're the only party that says we'll join every coalition that says that will give us the keys to to carrying out our promises to our voters. If you vote for Kulanu, you will have a 100% chance of making a change.
MK Lipman, do you want to answer? We're going to let the big parties go last.
You should vote based on your values. You should vote based on the parties that are talking about the issues, and there are sometimes the smaller parties, or the center parties, so to speak, deal with core issues. I want to highlight 4 in the minute that I have. On the Haredi issue, on integration to society, my biggest fear going to these elections is the larger side parties on both sides that will listen to the slogan of the Haredi parties of turn the clock back on all the progress that has been made. We're the only party talking about making sure that we keep the progress going. Religion and state in general. We have laws, legislation in the pipeline to get to a point where we have no agunot in Israel, letting secular Israel breathe somewhat in terms of religion and state issues. Corruption hasn't been talked about tonight. And legislation which failed in the last Knesset, unfortunately, which we co-sponsored, that someone who's found guilty of moral turpitude while in office can never come back as an MK or a minister. These are laws which impact all of our lives. And finally, a party that talks about Olim, a party of Olim from all immigrant backgrounds that are going to make life better for all immigrants in Israel. The larger parties tend to move away from that. Middle-sized parties can get that done.
Thank you. Okay. Mr. Begin, you have 1 minute. And you have water bottles here if you want to make like the head of your party for your...
Myself. Let me be personal, which I seldom do. You heard it. I think it's an amazing phenomenon that even here tonight, the representative from Meretz praised Prime Minister Menachem Begin for his action back in 1981. Of course, there is totally no analogy between that situation and the Iranian situation. I think it represents a non-mature view of world affairs and the Middle East, but it represents a phenomenon. My father and teacher has been mentioned during this campaign in unprecedented numbers, almost difficult to understand, and please note that.
Your time is up.
I'm sorry?
Oh, no.
All right, finish. Don't worry about it.
Go on. I want to hear it.
We were mentioned. My family was mentioned, right?
Okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, I knew Menachem Begin. And I never pretend to speak on his behalf. I'm not his spokesman. I never guess what would he have been saying to date on this or the other issue. There are pretenders in the political market. And now, excuse me, Michael, the leader of your party is one of these pretenders. Here's a new heir to Prime Minister Begin. I would say to the real Begin, okay? I think it's not right. Of course, he can pretend in whatever way he would like to, but don't be deceived. It's a very tricky game. I think that you know that Moshe Kachlon, a friend, is investing a lot of effort through this